In the stillness of Frost Ridge, a neighborhood tucked under a blanket of snow, you might think the only thing causing a stir was the crunch of boots on driveways. But beneath the calm, something bitter was brewing. Marshall Prescott loved to things every December. Hot cider and building snowmen with his son, Liam. It had become a tradition. Year after year, they didn't just roll snowballs, they engineered personalities. This winter's creation, Buck, standing proudly on their front lawn. Buck wore Liam's old scarf, ski goggles, and a wicked crooked carrot grin. He had mittens for ears and a twig arm that pointed toward the street like a frozen sentinel. But Buck didn't last long. At 6:58 a.m., while the sun still hid behind gray skies, a black SUV glided silently past the rows of homes. No headlights, no hesitation. Then came a sharp swerve. The tires carved straight across the Prescott's lawn, and Buck was gone. Liam saw the wreckage first. The carrot was cracked in half, his scarf buried under a muddy tire track. Marshall reviewed the doorbell cam footage twice. The plates weren't clear, but the vehicle was familiar to familiar. Karen, he muttered, jaw tightening. Again, Karen Wexley, the HOA board president. She smiled like a magazine model, walked like a retired ballerina, and ruled the neighborhood like she was running a boot camp. For 2 years now, snowmen across Meadowpine Drive had been mysteriously erased. No one had proof, only rumors and tire marks, and now it was personal. That evening, Karen strutted past the Prescott house with her Pomeranian and a cup of green tea. Her eyes flitted toward the bare patch of slush on their lawn. "Hope your little snow buddy had insurance," she said casually, not slowing her pace. Liam looked up at his dad. "She knows, doesn't she?" "Oh, she knows," Marshall said, "and she thinks it's over." But it wasn't. Inside the garage, Marshall pulled out a crate labeled Project Remnant. It held pieces from his Navy fabrication days steel. Tubing, rusted bolts, weatherproof brackets. It was leftover scrap most people would have tossed. But Marshall saw more than metal. This year, Buck would come back, but not like before. Over the next 3 nights, while the neighborhood slept, the garage came alive. Sparks flew behind closed doors, and muffled hammering echoed into the snow. Liam stood nearby with safety goggles, handing his dad tools and giggling at sketches that looked like snowman blueprints, mixed with battle armor. By day 4, they rolled the new snowballs into place. Same outer look, same scarf, same sunglasses, but inside, welded steel and reinforced rebar. This wasn't just a snowman. It was bait. Marshall even adjusted the internal mass, shifting the weight so it wouldn't budge easily no matter what came at it. Then he mounted the base into the frozen soil with spiked anchors. They stood back and admired the result. From a distance, it looked innocent. Up close, it hummed with quiet defiance. Liam tilted his head. "Do we wait for her?" Marshall smiled faintly. "We don't wait. We let her think we forgot." And just like that, the trap was set. But what Marshall didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Karen had already taken notice. She'd driven past the house twice that day, both times slowly. Her Pomeranian barked once at the new Buck. Maybe it sensed what was coming. Climax plus ending twist. Later that night, under a dim moon and with snow beginning to fall again, a familiar SUV rolled down Meadowpine Drive. Slower this time. Its tires paused just inches from the curb in front of the Prescott house. Inside, Karen leaned forward, the edge of a smile curled as she reached toward the gear shift. She didn't know Buck was waiting. The wind was picking up, rattling porch flags and sweeping powdered snow across driveways. Frost Ridge was quiet, but Marshall Prescott wasn't asleep. Not yet. He sat in the dark living room, coffee in one hand, remote in the other, flipping between driveway camera angles like he was guarding a government vault. Liam had passed out on the couch in his footy pajamas, the blanket slipping from his shoulder as the soft glow of the security screen lit his face. Then movement. The black SUV crawled up Meadowpine Drive again. Slower than before, it paused directly in front of their yard. Its engine hummed low. The brake lights blinked. Marshall leaned forward. "Come on." Inside the SUV, Karen Wexley smirked, one hand gripping her chai latte, the other on the wheel. Her Pomeranian yapped in the passenger seat, but she didn't bother to hush it. She was too focused on her target. "Nice try," she muttered, staring at Buck. "Let's see how well you handle this one." She didn't floor it this time. She eased forward with a long, calculated roll, just enough speed to leave an imprint, just enough to destroy without suspicion. But the moment the bumper kissed Buck's belly, something snapped. The SUV jolted. The sound wasn't the soft crush of snow, it was a metallic clang, like a bat hitting a lamppost. The hood bounced, and Karen's tea flew into her lap. The Pomeranian screamed. Buck stood still, unmoved, like a frozen bouncer refusing entry. Karen, threw the car in park, stormed out, and marched up to the Snowman, rubbing her knee from the sudden jolt. She looked around, nobody on the street. Then she leaned in and knocked on Buck's midsection. Clink. Metal. Karen's lips twitched. She turned and spotted the tiny red LED light on the security cam mounted above the garage. She was being watched, and worse, recorded. Her smirk vanished. Back in the house, Marshall grinned. "Gotcha." He watched her get back into the SUV, throw it in reverse, and peel out straight over her own mailbox across the street. The impact shattered it clean, off its post. She didn't stop. Marshall picked up Liam and carried him to bed. He knew Karen wouldn't go down without a tantrum. But this was the first move, and the game had changed. The next morning, Karen sent out an emergency HOA bulletin through the community app. Neighborhood alert. Hazardous yard display on Meadowpine. Drivia structure posing a risk to vehicle safety and neighborhood harmony has been identified. The board will review and take appropriate action. Residents are reminded to report any decor that violates HOA standards. Marshall stared at the message on his phone. "Hazardous," he said, incredulous. "It's a snowman sitting in my own yard." But Karen wasn't finished. That afternoon, she marched down the street flanked by Steve Redfern, the HOA's timid treasurer, and two clipboard-wielding volunteers she'd wrangled from the Pickleball League. Karen wore a TRENCH coat, black gloves, and the same smug smile she used at every board meeting. "This is a safety issue," she declared, pointing at Buck. "I've filed a formal complaint." Steve scratched his head. "Karen, it's just a snowman." Karen leaned closer. "He's filled it with metal. I dented my car." "Why were you driving across his lawn?" Steve asked. Voice lowering. She snapped. "Because he doesn't respect regulations. There's no approval for this thing. It could impale a child." Across the yard, Marshall stepped out with a coffee. "Afternoon," he said casually. "Something wrong with Buck?" Karen turned like a vulture spotting prey. "That snowman is a public menace." Marshall nodded slowly. "He's in my yard, built on my property. Unless the HOA's claiming eminent domain over lawn art, I think we're good." Karen's jaw tensed. Steve tried to intervene. "Let's just review it at the next meeting, okay?" She stormed off without another word. Climax plus ending twist. But that night, around 11 p.m., the neighborhood power flickered. Then the camera feed cut to static. just for 6 minutes. Long enough for something to happen, or disappear. When the cameras came back online, Buck was gone. Not a trace. No tracks. Just a bare circle in the snow and a twisted twig arm lying on the driveway. Liam found it in the morning. "Dad," he whispered, "they took him." It was still dark when Marshall stepped out onto his porch, the wind sharp and biting, carrying the kind of cold that seemed to whisper warnings. But it wasn't the chill that stopped him in his tracks, it was the empty spot in the yard. Buck was gone. Not pushed over, not damaged. Gone. Vanished without so much as a bent spike left in the ground. Beside the cleared circle lay a single arm. The branch. Liam picked it up slowly. "They took him," he whispered, his voice cracking. Marshall scanned the yard. No tire marks. No footprints. Just smoothed over snow. It had to have happened during the blackout. Someone had planned this. Karen. Marshall clenched his jaw. This wasn't just pettiness anymore. This was calculated. Someone had wanted Buck gone badly enough to cut the neighborhood's power and wipe out his camera feeds. And yet, they missed something. He opened the side panel on the cam by the garage. It had a backup drive, a separate, hidden memory stick built into the housing from his military security days. He pulled it out carefully and plugged it into his laptop. The footage was grainy. The power flickered, then dropped. Total darkness. For almost 6 minutes. Nothing. But the thermal cam, still rolling. And what it showed made Marshall's eyes narrow. 2 figures. One taller, one hunched. The taller one used bolt cutters and a dolly. The smaller one moved awkwardly, dragging something under a tarp. It wasn't kids. These were adults, organized and quiet. And then a third figure. Standing at the end of the driveway, just beyond the camera's range but not beyond its. Audio. There was a cough. Dry, sharp. Familiar. Karen. Marshall hit pause and stared at the screen. She hadn't just come by to inspect. She'd orchestrated this. But this wasn't just about Buck anymore. This was about territory. Control. Karen didn't like being made a fool. And she definitely didn't like losing face on her own turf. Marshall wasn't going to let it slide. Down in his basement, under the laundry chute, he dusted off a roll of old fabrication blueprints and unrolled them across the workbench. It was time for phase 2. Liam peeked in. "Are we making Buck again?" Marshall looked at his son, then back to the schematics. "No," he said. "This time, we build frostbite." Liam's eyes widened. They spent the day gathering supplies: steel, tubes, concrete mix, motion sensors, solar batteries, and paint. Marshall even called in a favor from his old buddy Travis, a retired welder who owed him one from their Navy days. "Tell me this isn't about HOA Snowman," Travis said, raising an eyebrow. "It's bigger than Snowman now," Marshall replied grimly. "It's a turf war." They worked for 3 nights straight in the garage, shades down, tools clanging, the smell of welding in the air. This time, the frame was thicker, with spring-loaded shoulders and a hollow center that would house something special. Motion detection, voice chip, internal lights, and a concrete-reinforced spine disguised in soft-packed snow. It looked cute. Enough from the curb. A jolly snowman with a new scarf and big rubber boots. But inside, it was a sleeper agent made for one job: survive. Marshall installed a hidden camera in Frostbite's eye socket. Another in the mailbox. A third buried in a garden gnome. By the time Frostbite was finished, it was the middle of the weekend. Word was already spreading across the block. Karen hadn't stopped. She'd gone full crusade. The Johnsons had their inflatable Santa slashed. The Nguyen twins' lights had been unplugged and their snow fort stomped flat. Karen had even cited the Elmores for excessive icicle density. She was on a mission, and Marshall knew it was just a matter of time before she came back for round to dot, so they waited. Climax plus ending twist. At exactly 2:27 a.m., the mailbox camera caught a shadow moving across the yard. 2 figures, same shape, same gait. But this time, one of them tripped a motion sensor. Frostbite's eyes glowed. The voice chip kicked in, and in a deep, mechanical echo, it said, "Warning. Unauthorized removal of holiday cheer will be prosecuted." The shadow froze, and just like that, one of them screamed. Snow drifted gently onto a frost ridge, masking the battle lines forming beneath its soft blanket. But the night was far from peaceful. At 2:27 a.m., the trap was triggered. Frostbites. Glowing eyes lit up, casting an eerie red hue across the white lawn. The mechanical voice echoed from his chest, "Warning. Unauthorized removal of holiday cheer will be prosecuted." There was a pause, a moment where even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then a scream cut through the quiet. The taller intruder bolted, slipping across the driveway and disappearing behind a hedge. The smaller one stumbled backward, tripped over a flower bed, and landed flat on the sidewalk with a grunt. A heavy thud followed. A toolbox dropped in the panicked dot inside the house. Marshall was already on his feet, throwing on a coat. He grabbed his flashlight and his phone and stepped into the freezing air. Camera already recording. The front yard was a mess. Footprints fresh and frantic scattered across the snow. Frostbite still stood firm, his red eyes dimming now that the intruders had retreated. Then Marshall spotted her. Karen, standing across the street, arms folded, robe fluttering. In the wind. No dog. No car. Just her, watching with a look that flickered between shock and fury. "You do realize," she called across the road, "you're escalating this." Marshall didn't flinch. "Escalating? You mean building a snowman in my yard?" She stepped closer. "This neighborhood used to have order. We had standards. Decorations followed rules. No eyesores. No steel traps." Marshall raised an eyebrow. "Karen, you've been vandalizing people's lawns, driving over snowmen, cutting cords. That's not enforcing standards. That's sabotage." Karen narrowed her eyes. "You think you've outsmarted me with your little robot. This isn't over." Then she walked off. No threats. No tantrum. Just a quiet retreat into the darkness. And that was what made Marshall uneasy. Because when Karen went quiet, it meant she was planning something. The next morning, HOA board members were out early. Steve Redfern, clipboard in hand, knocked on Marshall's door just after 8. "Morning," he said, shifting uncomfortably. "Got a formal complaint here. Something about unlawful surveillance and emotional trauma caused by aggressive decorations." Marshall blinked. "You're kidding." "I wish I was." Steve sighed. "Karen claims your snowman startled one of her friends, and she's requesting immediate removal. She also filed for a special meeting of the HOA Enforcement Committee." Marshall leaned on the doorframe. "Let me guess, she chairs that committee." Steve gave a weak smile. "I'm just the treasurer." Marshall looked over his shoulder at Frostbite, who now stood motionless again, scarf fluttering in the breeze. "She's scared of it," Liam said from the hallway. Marshall didn't answer, but he knew his son was right. Still, something was off. Karen didn't scare easily. Why play victim now? Then, that afternoon, the twist came. A notice was slipped under every door on the block. An emergency HOA bylaw revision proposal. Proposed. Rule number 438B. All outdoor decorations must be removable by hand and constructed entirely of natural or biodegradable materials. No metal, plastic, electronics, or anchored structures allowed. It was a full-on strike against Frostbite and every future version of him. Marshall read the paper twice. She wants to ban steel snowmen, he muttered. Liam looked worried. What do? We show up, Marshall said, tapping the paper, and we make sure she doesn't win. Climax plus ending twist. Later that night, just as Marshall was setting up a projector to compile footage for the upcoming meeting, his phone buzzed. An unknown number. He answered cautiously. A voice whispered through the static. You don't know me, but I saw what she did. I've got proof. Meet me tomorrow behind the tennis courts, 9 a.m. Come alone. Marshall paused. Who is this? The line clicked dead. Frost Ridge wasn't used to shadows moving before sunrise. But at 8:58 a.m., Marshall Prescott was already trudging through packed snow behind the HOA tennis courts, his boots crunching a rhythm only nerves could follow. He scanned the rows of iced-over bleachers. Nothing. Just swirling wind and the distant echo of a barking dog. Then came a whistle soft, low, behind the chain-link gate. Marshall turned. A figure emerged, gloved and hooded, holding a folder thick with printed pages and photos. The face underneath was a surprise. Cliff, Marshall blinked. You're Karen's long guy. Cliff Nolan looked both ways before answering. Not anymore. He handed over the folder. I've been working for her 3 years. She makes me mow in straight angles, scrub the bird bath every Tuesday. And once, she made me repaint a mailbox because it had a spider on it. But last week, she asked me to do something worse. Marshall opened the folder. Inside were printed security stills, grainy shots of Karen's backyard shed. One showed two figures loading something heavy onto a dolly. Another showed Karen pointing at what looked like Buck's melted remains. But there was more. She's got your old snowman in her shed, Cliff said, and it's not just him. Decorations from 4 other houses, broken Santas, plastic deer with shattered legs, one neighbor's menorah, it's all there. Marshall turned another page. A blurry image showed Karen and 2 men welding something likely the steel frame from Buck into a new sculpture, only it didn't look festive. It looked ominous. She's planning something for the HOA meeting, Cliff said. I heard her on a call. Said she's going to teach him a lesson with his own weapon. I think she's building a snowman of her own. But not like yours. Worse? Marshall clenched the folder. Thanks, Cliff. You just helped this neighborhood more than you know. As he left, Cliff called out, one more thing. Be careful. Karen's not doing this alone. She's got help from inside the board. That last part stuck with Marshall. If Karen had board support, the vote at tonight's HOA meeting could go her way. If her bylaw passed, frostbite would be illegal. But worse, Karen would win the war without even showing her hand. Back at the house, Marshall rallied his defense. He spent the afternoon compiling a video footage from his security cams, the heat signatures, audio of Karen's voice. Then, for good measure, he added a slow pan across Frostbite's glowing red eyes as dramatic music played in the background. Liam added the finishing touch, a hand-drawn poster board that read, Snowmen are neighbors too. That evening, the Prescott family walked into the HOA meeting carrying a tablet, the folder from Cliff, and a thermos of hot cocoa because if war was coming, they might as well be cozy. The community center was packed. Folding chairs filled the room. Karen sat at the front table, smug as ever, her clipboard stacked high with printed bylaws. On her left sat Steve, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Karen cleared her throat. Let's begin with tonight's pressing concern. Decorative hazards, unauthorized materials, and the threat of militarized snowmen. There were chuckles, a few nervous glances. Karen smiled. I propose we pass rule 438B immediately and begin enforcement by morning. Steve spoke up timidly. Marshall has the floor for rebuttal. Karen rolled her eyes. Marshall stood, set the tablet on the table, and hit play. The room darkened. The video began doorbell cam footage, thermal outlines, the jarring clang of the SUV hitting Buck. Karen's voice whispering commands off-screen. Then the stills from Cliff's folder, one by one. The shed, the tools, the melted remains. The board was silent. Then Frostbite's voice echoed through the speakers. Unauthorized removal of holiday chair will be prosecuted. Half the room burst into laughter. The other half applauded. Climax plus ending twist, just when Marshall thought the tide had turned. Karen stood slowly. I admit, she said, I took certain liberties, but I did it for the community. Then she pulled back a sheet covering a large object behind her, revealing her latest creation. A towering 7-foot-tall snowman. Jet black coal eyes. A top hat made of sheet metal. And in its center clearly visible Buck's original Broncos beanie, now spray-painted silver. She smiled coldly. Meet Blizzard. He'll be joining us, permanently. Gasps filled the HOA meeting hall. The air suddenly felt colder, though the heating was running just fine. There he stood, Blizzard. Karen's towering, metallic snowman, constructed with unnerving precision. His eyes were coal black, his mouth stitched from jagged bits of aluminum, and smack in the middle of his chest was Buck's old Broncos beanie, defaced with a silver spray paint cross over the logo. Like a trophy, like a warning. Marshall stared. Liam clutched his arm. That's Buck's hat, Dad. Karen's voice cut through the murmurs. This neighborhood deserves a symbol of order of consequence. You want snowmen. Fine. But they should represent strength, not chaos. Steve Redfern, still seated beside her, muttered under his breath, You built a snow terminator, Karen. Karen smiled, smug and proud. Meet Blizzard. Built from the remains of the very chaos you invited. Marshall stepped forward slowly. You stole Buck from my yard. You trespassed. You vandalized. And now you're parading the remains in front of the people you claim to represent. Karen shrugged. Call it creative recycling. Murmurs began to stir in the audience. Some clapped. Some booed. Others simply watched, mouths open, caught between neighborhood politics and what felt more like a holiday-themed showdown. Marshall didn't flinch. This isn't over. Karen tilted her head. Oh, but it is. The vote's in 20 minutes. And by the time it passes, your steel core frostbite will be nothing but an unauthorized structure scheduled for removal. Shall I send Cliff to do the honors from the back of the room? Cliff's voice cut in. I quit last week, Karen. Keep my name out of your HOA nonsense. Heads turned. Karen's smug expression faltered. Cliff stood, walking forward with the folder of photos he'd given Marshall earlier. Folks, you should know she's been ordering the destruction of decorations for 2 winters. Lights, snowmen, even the new Yen twins' inflatable reindeer, she paid me to slash it. Karen's face turned stiff. That's hearsay. Cliff tossed the folder on the table. And this is visual evidence. Steve picked it up. His eyes widened. Karen, is this real? She didn't answer. Instead, she crossed her arms and stared at the audience. Do any of you want steel snowmen on every lawn? Do you want your streets looking like scrapyards? I did what I had to protect Frost Ridge. Marshall stepped up beside her. By turning it into your own little dictatorship, this isn't about snowmen. This is about you needing to control everything and punishing anyone who doesn't follow your rule book to the letter. The audience was silent now. Then an older woman in the back, Mrs. Ellery, raised her hand. I say we vote now. And not just on the bylaw. I say we vote on Karen's position as HOA president. The room buzzed with whispers. Then nods. Then claps. Karen's lips parted, but no sound came. Steve cleared his throat. Motion on the table. All in favor of voting on both the proposed decoration bylaw and a leadership review. A sea of hands went up. Steve looked at Karen. Sorry, she hissed. This is a witch hunt. More like a snowman hunt, Cliff muttered. Climax plus ending twist. Voting began. One by one, ballots dropped into the HOA bin. And while that unfolded, Marshall quietly slipped out of the meeting and returned home. Because he knew something no one else did. Karen had installed Blizzard on HOA grounds. That meant she'd broken the very bylaw she was proposing. No fixed. Outdoor decoration made of metal or non-biodegradable material may be installed without board approval. She hadn't filed a request. She hadn't received a vote. And Marshall had the timestamps and location reports to prove it. He sent it all in an email to the HOA board footage, and the rule she was about to violate. As the ballots were counted, Steve raised an eyebrow at his phone. Well, would you look at that? Karen saw the change in his face. What? He looked up slowly. Karen, Blizzard's already in violation. She blanched. You can't be serious. Oh, I'm very serious, Steve said, his voice finally finding its backbone. Looks like your own creation just melted your argument. The vote was done. The crowd leaned in as Steve, the treasurer turned reluctant leader, read off the results. First came the ruling on Karen's new bylaw, the one aimed squarely at frostbite. Proposed rule for 38B, Steve read. Failed. 4 votes for, 26 against. Gasps and relieved chuckles spread across the room. Then came the second result, one that made Karen's jaw clench. Before the first syllable even left Steve's mouth. Motion to remove Karen. Wexley as HOA board president. Passed. 23-7. Karen stood slowly. You can't be serious. Marshall folded his arms from the side of the room. Dead serious. You think this is about some snowman? Karen snapped, her voice rising. I've given this community structure, discipline. Without me, the lawns would turn to weeds and reindeer inflatables would fill every sidewalk. A hand went up. Mrs. Ellery again. We'd rather have inflatable reindeer than your iron-fisted HOA. That drew applause. Karen looked around, realizing she was standing alone in a room that had once obeyed her like a queen. She snatched her clipboard, stormed toward the exit, and hissed, "You'll regret this." But just before she left, she turned back and barked one last warning. And don't even think about touching Blizzard. He's mine now. The door slammed behind her. The next morning, things in Frost Ridge shifted. Neighbors came out to shovel snow and actually waved at each other. Kids built mini snowmen without fear of silent SUV visits. And for the first time in 2 years, the Johnsons put up their full 12-foot inflatable Grinch. But Karen's legacy still loomed, because Blizzard still stood at the front of the whole office lawn, massive, dark, looming like a frozen dictator. No one dared go near it. It hadn't been taken down, and no official order had come in yet. Marshall stared at the sculpture from his front porch that afternoon, the way it cast a long shadow over the street, like it was still watching. That's when Liam stepped outside. What are we gonna do about Blizzard? Marshall didn't answer right away. His eyes were locked on the pile of parts they'd used to build Frostbite hidden in the garage. Waiting. It's time for one final snowman, he said. That night, under cover of light snowfall, Marshall got to work. He and Liam rolled the snow by hand, slow, deliberate. They rebuilt Frostbite, but this time with a slight upgrade, stronger inner supports, a wider base, and most importantly, an embedded anchor chain. Right at midnight, they wheeled the final piece into place directly across from Blizzard. Frostbite faced the monstrous creation like a lone soldier in a standoff. His scarf fluttered slightly in the wind. A soft blue glow lit his eyes. Then Marshall turned on the speaker he'd planted inside. A voice echoed across the quiet street. "Blizzard, you were built on stolen cheer. Time to go home." It was a challenge, and it was heard. Because the next morning, Blizzard was gone. Just gone. That no trail, no tire tracks. Just an indent in the snow where his heavy base had rusted. And something strange, a broken chain, partially melted ice, and a spray-painted message on the sidewalk. "Nice try." Marshall stared at it, uneasy. "Where'd she take him?" Liam asked. "I don't know," Marshall replied, already checking his cams. But she didn't leave quietly. Sure enough, an hour later, a drone flew down the street, hovered briefly over their house, then zipped away. Karen wasn't done. Climax plus ending twist. Later that night, as Marshall reviewed the drone footage the camera caught, he zoomed in on a strange detail. The drone wasn't just recording, it had dropped something in their backyard. Nestled behind the tool shed, a small blinking light pulsed faintly beneath the snow. Marshall approached it carefully, brushing the snow away. It wasn't a camera. It was a beacon, and it was still transmitting. He looked up at Liam. "She's watching us." Marshall stood in the cold backyard, eyes fixed on the blinking beacon buried just beneath the snow. The faint red light pulsed steadily, like a heartbeat in the dark. This was no accident. Karen was still in the game, watching, waiting, plotting. Liam wrapped his arms around his dad's leg. "Dad, what is that?" Marshall knelt down and shook his head. "A tracker. Or worse, a device to spy on us." The thought sent a shiver deeper than the winter chill. They hurried inside and shut the door tight behind them. Marshall immediately called Cliff, their unexpected ally, who agreed to come over with some tools and experience in electronics. 2 hours later, Cliff was crouched in the snow, dismantling the device piece by piece. "This thing's no joke," he muttered. "Signals encrypted, but the transmitter's low power." Karen wanted to keep tabs without tipping off the neighborhood. Marshall's jaw clenched. She's been a ghost, but she's not finished. She wants control, no matter what it takes. Liam sat nearby, eyes wide. "So, what do we do now?" Marshall looked out the window, staring at frostbite standing firm against the night. "We fight back smarter." The next day, Marshall took the evidence to the local police and community watch. The tracker, drone footage, and footage from there. Hidden Cams built a case for beyond HOA drama. This was harassment and stalking. With neighbors rallying behind him, the tides truly turned. Karen received a cease and desist letter. The HOA formally voted to remove her from all neighborhood committees. And as for Blizzard, the HOA arranged for its safe removal, replacing it with a simple wooden snowman, painted with community artwork. But Karen's stubbornness wasn't done. At the following neighborhood meeting, she showed up uninvited, carrying a stack of legal papers and a determined glare. "I will not be silenced," she declared. "This community needs order, and I will fight for it." The room was tense. But Liam stood up, holding his hand-drawn sign that read, "Snowmen are neighbors too." Marshall joined his son and spoke calmly. "This isn't about snowmen. It's about respect. For families, for traditions, and for each other." Slowly, the mood shifted. Karen's fire was met with firm resolve. The community stood united, not against each other, but for peace. Climax plus ending twist. Weeks later, as spring thawed the last of the snow, a new tradition began. The Prescotts, with help from neighbors, built a new snowman, this time with a hollow core filled with community letters, small trinkets, and messages of hope. They called him Unity, and on its base, a simple plaque read, "Built stronger together." Karen? She moved away quietly, the last frost of her rain melting. Away with the season.